What does betrayal feel like? It's not a loud explosion. It's a quiet, cold click. The sound of a keycard granting access to a place you belong, only to show you that you don't. For Eleanor Vance, it was the sound of the executive elevator door sliding open on the 55th floor. She was holding a vintage 1965 Rolex, a surprise for her husband's 10th anniversary. She was wearing the scent of his favorite perfume and a heart full of love. But the scent that met her in his private office wasn't the familiar aroma of coffee and success. It was the sickeningly sweet smell of cheap perfume and shattered trust. This isn't just a story about cheating. It's a story about how the perfect life can be a perfect lie, and how the people you love the most can build your prison. The sun, a brilliant September morning orb, spilled into the sprawling kitchen of the Vance residence in Greenwich, Connecticut. It glinted off the polished chrome of the Sub-Zero refrigerator and warmed the Carrera marble island, where Eleanor Vance sat a delicate porcelain cup of Earl Grey steaming in her hands. From the outside, her life was a masterpiece of modern success. The house, a stunning glass and steel structure she had co-designed years ago, overlooked a serene wooded valley. Her husband, Liam Vance, was the charismatic founder and CEO of Vance Innovations, a tech giant that had revolutionized data security. They were the golden couple, their story, a fairy tale of college sweethearts who had built an empire from a garage and a dream. Today was special. It was their 10th wedding anniversary. A decade. 10 years since she'd stood opposite a nervous, impossibly young Liam and promised him forever. He'd had nothing then but a brilliant mind and a force in his eyes that promised to conquer the world. She, a promising architect fresh out of Yale, had believed in that fire more than anyone. She'd put her own career on hold, trading blueprints for board meetings, her drafting table for dinner parties becoming the perfect supportive partner who smoothed his path and managed their life so he could focus on his ascent. She smiled, tracing the rim of her cup. He'd left before dawn, as usual, a quick kiss on her forehead, his only goodbye. A text message had buzzed on her phone an hour later. Emergency meeting with the Tokyo board. We'll be late, my love. Let's celebrate this weekend. I love you. A familiar pang of disappointment pricked her heart, but she quickly smoothed it over. This was the price of his success. His ambition was a demanding mistress, and she had long ago made peace with sharing him. But today, she wanted to break the routine. For their 10th anniversary, she would not be the wife waiting patiently at home. She would be the woman who swept him off his feet. In the velvet-lined box resting on the counter beside her was her gift, a vintage 1965 Rolex Oyster Perpetual. The exact model his father, a humble watchmaker, had always dreamed of owning, but could never afford. It was more than a watch. It was a symbol of how far he'd come, a nod to the past that had forged him. Her plan was simple. She'd have their favorite champagne and 2 glasses delivered to his office. She'd arrive unannounced around lunch, whisk him away from his spreadsheets and conference calls, and take him to the small French bistro where he'd first proposed. A flutter of excitement danced in her stomach. It felt deliciously clandestine, a throwback to their more spontaneous, carefree days. She spent the morning meticulously preparing. She chose a sophisticated emerald green silk dress that brought out the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. She styled her auburn hair in soft waves that cascaded over her shoulders. Each step was a brushstroke on the canvas of the perfect surprise. As she drove her Tesla down the winding country roads towards the city, the autumn leaves painted the landscape in fiery hues of red and gold. She felt a deep, abiding sense of contentment. They had built this life together. Every sacrifice had been worth it. Liam was a good man. He was driven, yes, sometimes distant, but he was a good man. He loved her. She had never, not for a single moment in 10 years, had a reason to doubt that. Her sister Clara had called earlier. "Happy anniversary, Ellie. 10 years. Can you believe it?" Clara's voice was bright and bubbly as it always was. "I know. It feels like yesterday, and a lifetime ago all at once," Eleanor had replied, laughing. "Doing anything special? I'm actually on my way to surprise him now. Going to steal him away for the afternoon." There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, wow. That's bold. You know how he is about people just dropping in. It's our anniversary, Clara. I think he'll make an exception." Of course he will. Well, have fun. Tell him I said, happy anniversary, too." The call ended, and Eleanor thought nothing of the slight hesitation in her sister's voice. Clara had always been a little intimidated by Liam's corporate world. That was all. At 24, 5 years her junior, she was still finding her way, flitting between jobs and boyfriends, perpetually in awe of the stable, successful life Eleanor had built. Eleanor had always been her protector, her confidant, the one who paid her rent when she was short and offered a shoulder to cry on after every breakup. The Vance Innovations Tower was a monument to Liam's ambition, a shard of glittering glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan skyline. It was a place she knew well, yet had always felt like Liam's territory. She was the mistress of their home, but this tower was the seat of his kingdom. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalist design. A security guard, a familiar face named George, smiled warmly. "Mrs. Vance, a pleasure to see you." "Hello, George. I'm going up to surprise Mr. Vance for our anniversary. He'll be a lucky man," George said, his eyes twinkling as he buzzed her through the private security gate. "He's on a call, but I'm sure he won't mind being interrupted by you." She stepped into the executive elevator, the one that required a special key card. Liam's key card, which she kept on her own ring for emergencies. The polished steel doors slid shut, encasing her in a silent ascending box. The Rolex felt heavy and cool in her handbag. Her heart thumped with a giddy rhythm. She imagined the look on his face, the initial shock, the furrow of his brow at the interruption, and then the slow, spreading smile as he saw her, as he realized what day it was and what she was doing. The elevator chimed softly, arriving at the 55th floor. The penthouse level. It was reserved exclusively for Liam's office suite, the boardroom, and a small private lounge. The doors whispered open to a reception area of serene elegance. His executive assistant, a prim and efficient woman named Martha, was not at her desk. Good, Eleanor thought. Fewer witnesses to the interruption. The thick plush carpet muffled her footsteps as she walked down the short hallway toward the imposing oak doors of his office. She could hear voices from within, muffled but audible. George had said he was on a call. She paused, not wanting to barge in on a sensitive business discussion. Then she heard a laugh. It wasn't Liam's deep, rumbling laugh. It was a woman's laugh. High-pitched, unrestrained, and startlingly familiar. A cold knot formed in the pit of her stomach. It was probably a visiting executive, a client. There were a dozen logical explanations. She took a calming breath, her hand resting on the cool metal of the door handle. Then she heard Liam's voice, not the sharp, commanding tone of a CEO, but something softer, lower, a murmur. And the woman's voice replied, not with business jargon, but with a single, breathy word. His name. Liam. The familiarity of that voice combined with the intimacy of the tone sent a jolt of pure ice through Eleanor's veins. Her carefully constructed surprise, her perfect day. Her entire world suddenly felt fragile, like a thin sheet of glass about to be struck. Against her better judgment, overriding every instinct that screamed at her to turn around and run, she pressed down on the handle. The door was heavy and soundproofed, but it wasn't locked. It swung open with a faint, expensive sigh. And the perfect world of Eleanor Vance didn't just crack. It exploded into a million unrecognizable pieces. The scene that greeted her was a tableau of betrayal so stark and vulgar it seemed ripped from a cheap melodrama rather than her own life. The office, usually a pristine space of organized power, with its mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows, and panoramic views of the city, was in disarray. A man's suit jacket. Liam's favorite charcoal grey Tom Ford was carelessly slung over a leather armchair. A pair of black stilettos, ones she'd seen 100 times before, were kicked off near the desk. And there, standing by the vast window that overlooked the city they had supposedly conquered together, was her husband. His back was to her. He was not on the phone. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled. His hands were wrapped around the waist of a woman in a slim-fitting crimson dress, a dress Eleanor now recognized with a sickening lurch. She had helped her pick it out last month. As the door clicked softly shut behind Eleanor, they broke apart, turning slowly, their faces a mixture of surprise and guilt-ridden horror. The woman was her sister, Clara. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. Time seemed to warp, stretching the moment into an eternity of silent agony. Clara's face, usually so open and youthful, was a mask of shock, her lipstick slightly smeared. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as their mother's, darted from Eleanor to Liam and back again, wide with panic. Liam's expression was worse. It was the face of a man who had been caught in a lie so profound it had destroyed everything. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt under the harsh office lighting. "Ellie!" Liam breathed his voice a hoarse whisper. He took a half-step toward her, his hands raised in a gesture of what surrender explanation. Eleanor didn't hear him. She couldn't hear anything over the deafening roar in her own ears. Her gaze was locked on her sister. Her little sister Clara, who she had bandaged knees for, who she had coached through finals, who she had held while she cried over a broken heart just 3 months ago. Clara standing in her husband's arms in his private office on their 10th wedding anniversary. The vintage Rolex in her handbag felt like a block of lead. The emerald silk of her dress felt like a costume for a fool. The carefully planned surprise, the champagne, the bistro, it all curdled into a bitter, humiliating joke. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw the priceless watch at the window. A strange glacial calm settled over her. It was the calm of profound, irreversible shock, the body's last defense against a pain too great to process. Her eyes moved from Clara's face to the crimson dress, then to the couch in the corner of the room. A silk scarf, one Eleanor had given Clara for her last birthday, lay crumpled on the floor next to it, a fallen flag of their sisterhood. Ellie, it's not what you think," Clara stammered, her voice thin and reedy. It was a pathetic cliché line, so absurd in the face of the undeniable truth that a hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up from Eleanor's chest. She choked it down. Eleanor simply looked at her, a long, empty stare that held a decade of love and a moment of infinite betrayal. She saw it all in that moment, the little lies, the subtle manipulations, the emergency funds Clara always needed, the way she would flatter Liam, hanging on his every word at family dinners. It was all there, a hidden, rotten tapestry she had been too blind, too trusting to see. Without a word, she turned. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She walked back to the door, her hand closing around the handle. "Eleanor, wait. Please." Liam's voice was desperate now, cracking with a panic she'd never heard from him before. He lunged forward, but it was too late. She was already out the door, pulling it shut with a final definitive click. She walked past the empty assistant's desk, her posture ramrod straight, her face a blank, emotionless mask. She didn't run. She walked with a chilling, deliberate slowness, as if she were carrying something fragile and impossibly heavy. She stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the polished steel, a stranger, a pale, haunted woman in a ridiculously cheerful green dress. As the doors slid shut, sealing her off from the wreckage on the 55th floor, the first sob tore through her, a raw, ragged sound ripped from the very core of her being. She crumpled against the wall of the elevator, her body shaking uncontrollably as it descended floor by floor from the life she thought she had. The ride down was an eternity of silent, violent grief. By the time the doors opened into the bustling lobby, she had pulled the mask back into place. She walked past George at the security desk, her head held high, ignoring his cheerful wave. She was a ghost, gliding through a world that no longer felt real. The drive home was a blur. The vibrant autumn colors that had seemed so beautiful an hour ago were now just a meaningless smear of pigment. She navigated the familiar roads on pure muscle memory, her mind a maelstrom of images. Clara's panicked eyes, Liam's guilty face, the crumpled scarf on the floor. She parked the car in the garage of their magnificent home, the home she had helped design, and the silence was absolute. It was a house built for two, a monument to their partnership, and now it felt like a mausoleum. She walked through the grand entryway, her heels clicking on the travertine floor, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. She went to their bedroom, the room they had shared for 10 years. On Liam's bedside table was a framed photo of them on their wedding day, laughing full of hope. With a single swift motion, she swept it off the table. The glass shattered against the floor, mirroring the state of her heart. The rage came, then a hot, cleansing fire that burned away the shock and the grief. It was a rage born of a decade of sacrifice, a decade of prioritizing his dreams, his needs, his comfort. She had been the foundation, the steady, unseen support that allowed his skyscraper to rise. And he had built a secret room at the very top for her sister. She began to pack, not with the frantic energy of escape, but with the cold, methodical precision of an architect drawing up demolition plans. She took only what was hers, her clothes, her books, her personal files, the box of blueprints from her college days that she kept in the back of her closet like a forgotten dream. As she was zipping the last suitcase, she heard his car pull into the driveway. She heard the front door open, his footsteps frantic on the stairs. He burst into the bedroom, his face ashen, his tie gone, his eyes wild with desperation. "Ellie, thank God. Please just let me explain." Eleanor turned to face him, her expression unreadable. The suitcases stood between them like barricades. "Explain what?" "Liam." she asked, her voice devoid of any warmth, as cold and clear as glass. Explain the logistics or the timeline? Or should we start with how you managed to look me in the eye this morning and tell me you loved me? It was a mistake, he pleaded, his voice breaking. A terrible, stupid mistake. It meant nothing. Nothing. She finally let out that laugh, and it was a bitter, ugly sound. It meant nothing. Which part meant nothing? Liam. The part where you betrayed me, or the part where you did it with my own sister Clara. She was having a hard time. She came to me for help. He began the words, fumbling out a pathetic attempt to weave a new lie. Eleanor held up a hand, silencing him. Don't, she said the single word, laced with so much pain and fury that he physically recoiled. Don't you dare try to make this my fault or my responsibility. And don't you ever say her name to me again. She picked up her suitcases, one in each hand. As she walked past him towards the door, her shoulder brushed his. For a fleeting second she smelled his cologne, the familiar scent of sandalwood and bergamot that had once meant safety and love. Now it smelled of deceit. At the bedroom door, she paused but didn't turn around. I want you out of this house by the time I get back from my mother's, she said, her voice flat and final. Get your things and get out of my life. And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing alone amidst the shattered glass and the ruins of their 10-year marriage. The days that followed were a suffocating fog of grief and disbelief. Eleanor drove to her mother's small, quiet house in upstate New York, a place of chintz curtains and the smell of baked bread, a world away from the cold, modern aesthetic of her life with Liam. She told her mother a sanitized version of the truth, that she and Liam were having problems and needed some space. She couldn't bring herself to utter the full, sordid reality. How could she tell the woman who had given birth to both her daughters that one had destroyed the other? Her phone was a relentless source of torment. Liam called dozens of times a day, his pleas growing more desperate with each unanswered ring. He sent long, rambling text messages filled with apologies, excuses, and declarations of love. It was once, Ellie, a moment of insanity. I was under so much pressure at work. It will never happen again. You are my life. Don't throw us away. Clara, too, tried to reach her. Her texts were a nauseating blend of feigned remorse and subtle victimhood. Ellie, I am so sorry. I hate myself for what I did. I was lost and confused. Liam was just being kind to me. Please don't hate me. You're my big sister. Eleanor read each message with a growing sense of detachment, as if she were studying a foreign language. The words were there, but the meaning was lost, hollowed out by the depth of their betrayal. She saw their frantic attempts to control the narrative, to minimize the damage, to paint themselves as flawed human beings who had made a mistake. But Eleanor knew better. Her architect's mind, trained to see the structure beneath the facade, began to work. A mistake was an accident. It was taking a wrong turn, spilling coffee, forgetting a birthday. This was not a mistake. This was a series of choices. 1,000 small decisions, lies, and clandestine meetings that had led to that moment in his office. It was a conspiracy. After a week of hiding, of crying until she had no tears left, a cold resolve began to crystallize in her heart. She wasn't just a victim. She was a partner in the life they had built, a 50% shareholder in their decade-long enterprise. She would not simply vanish into the night with a broken heart and a suitcase. She needed to understand the full anatomy of the lie. She drove back to Greenwich, timing her arrival for a weekday morning, when she knew Liam would be at the office, likely trying to hold his crumbling empire together. The house felt alien. The cleaner had been, and all traces of the shattered picture frame were gone. But the emptiness remained. Liam had complied with her demand. His closets were half empty, his personal effects gone from the bathroom. He had left a single handwritten letter on the marble island in the kitchen. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a long, rambling confession of his weakness and a desperate plea for forgiveness. He wrote of the immense stress of running his company, of feeling isolated and overwhelmed. He claimed Clara had sought him out vulnerable and in need of guidance, and that their connection had blurred into something he deeply regretted. He was trying to frame it as a moment of weakness, a perfect storm of pressure and opportunity. She looked up to me, he wrote. I felt like I could help her, and in doing so, I lost my way. It was a symptom of my own failings, not a reflection of my love for you. My love for you is the only real thing in my life. Eleanor read the words, and for the first time she felt not pain, but a spark of cynical intelligence. He was good. He was very, very good at spinning a story. He was casting himself as the flawed hero, and Clara as the damsel in distress. But something about it felt constructed, too neat. An architect knows when a load-bearing wall is hiding a crack. She put the letter aside. The time for emotion was over. It was time for facts. She started with their finances. As his wife, she had access to all their joint accounts and credit card statements. For years, she had left the management of their vast wealth to Liam and his accountants, content to sign whatever documents were placed in front of her. Not anymore. She logged into the online portal for their primary joint credit card, the one with the astronomical limit. She started scrolling back month by month. The usual charges were their extravagant dinners, first-class flights, donations to charities, her own purchases at designer boutiques. But then she started to notice a pattern, a charge from a 5-star hotel, the Carlyle in Manhattan, from 3 months ago, on a Tuesday afternoon. Liam was supposed to have been in back-to-back meetings, a charge for $450, not an overnight stay, a day rate, another one 6 weeks ago, the St. Regis. Same pattern, a weekday afternoon. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't once. This wasn't a moment of insanity. This was a habit. She kept digging. She found charges from high-end jewelry stores, a delicate diamond necklace from Tiffany & Co. purchased in July. She had never received it. A Cartier bracelet in August. Not for her. There were dinners for 2 at restaurants she'd never been to. Floral arrangements, sent to an address in the East Village she didn't recognize. With a growing sense of dread, she did a quick search for the address. It was a luxury apartment building. She cross-referenced the delivery date of the flowers with Clara's Instagram feed. And there it was, a photo of her sister beaming in a beautifully decorated new apartment. In the background on a coffee table was the exact bouquet of white orchids. The caption read, "So excited for my new chapter. Feeling so blessed and supported. Tad new beginnings, hashed girl boss the support." It wasn't just emotional. Liam hadn't just given her a shoulder to cry on. He had given her a new life. He was funding her entire existence. The rent on that apartment alone would be more than $5,000 a month. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a recent fling born of stress. This was a long-term, calculated affair. He had been lying to her for months, perhaps longer. And Clara had been taking her money, her husband and her life, all while smiling in her face, calling her for advice and playing the part of the adoring little sister. The rage returned, but this time it was different. It was cold, sharp, and focused. She was no longer just a heartbroken wife. She was an investigator. She had been a fool, but she would not remain one. Her mind raced. If they were this brazen with the joint credit card, what else were they hiding? The financial deception felt like a clue, a thread she could pull to unravel their entire web of lies. Liam's business. Vance Innovations was his life. It was a private company with him as the majority shareholder. She had signed a prenuptial agreement years ago, a standard document his lawyers had drafted, which largely separated her from the business itself in case of a divorce. At the time, it had seemed like a formality. Now it felt like a cage. But she remembered something. A few years ago, during a major refinancing of the company's debt, Liam had needed her to sign as a personal guarantor on a massive loan. He had explained it as a technicality, a way for the bank to feel secure. She had signed without reading the fine print, trusting him completely. Personal guarantor. The words echoed in her mind. If she was a guarantor, didn't that give her certain rights? The right to know the financial health of the entity she was guaranteeing. The lie about the affair was personal. But as she sat there, surrounded by damning financial statements, Eleanor began to suspect that the affair wasn't the real story. It was just a symptom of a much deeper, more dangerous disease, and she was standing right at its epicenter. The prenuptial agreement was a formidable document crafted by a team of New York's most ruthless corporate lawyers. It was designed to be an ironclad fortress, protecting Liam's primary asset, Vance Innovations. Reading it now in the stark silence of her marital home, Eleanor felt a chill. She had signed away her rights to the company's growth and profits with a naive flourish of her pen a decade ago, believing their love was the only contract that mattered. But the loan guarantee was a different matter entirely. It was a separate contract with the bank, a chink in Liam's armor. She found her copy in the steel file cabinet in their home office, a place she hadn't opened in years. The language was dense and intimidating, but one clause stood out as a guarantor of the $50 million line of credit. She was entitled to receive quarterly financial statements and material event disclosures from the company. Had she ever received them? No. They would have gone to Liam's office, intercepted by his team deemed irrelevant to the wife at home. It was another layer of the condescending bubble he had built around her. He handled the complex things. It was time to pop that bubble. Her first call was to Julian Croft. Julian was one of her oldest friends, her partner on their thesis project at Yale, and one of the few people from her old life she had managed to keep in touch with. He was now a partner at a boutique architecture firm, but his real talent had always been his razor-sharp analytical mind. He saw the world in terms of systems, structures, and stress points. She met him at a quiet coffee shop in the city, feeling like a spy on a covert mission. She laid out the basics, the affair, the financial deception, and her suspicion that it was all connected to something bigger. Julian listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with every word. When she finished, he pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at her, his eyes full of a mixture of sympathy and professional curiosity. "Ellie, I'm so sorry. This is monstrous," he said, his voice low. "But you're right. Men like Liam. Men who build empires. They don't have mistakes. They have strategies. The affair, the apartment for Clara. It feels like a payoff, like he's buying her silence or her loyalty for something. That's what I think, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than she expected. And I think it has to do with the company. The loan I guaranteed, it gives me the right to see the books. Then you need to exercise that right, Julian said, leaning forward. But not by going to Liam. He'll just stonewall you, create a new set of falsified documents. You need to go directly to the source, the bank, and you need a forensic accountant. He gave her a name, a woman named Evelyn Reed, known for her discretion and her tenacity. She's a shark, Ellie. If there's a single dollar out of place, she'll find it. The next day, Eleanor, armed with her copy of the guarantee agreement and a newfound sense of purpose, walked into the midtown headquarters of the bank that held Liam's loan. She met with a senior vice president, a man whose placid smile faltered when she calmly and firmly demanded 3 years' worth of quarterly financial statements for Vance Innovations, as per her rights as guarantor. He tried to redirect her to Liam's office, but she held her ground, quoting the specific clause in the contract. Legally, he had no choice but to comply. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick stack of documents to her mother's house. She immediately couriered them to Evelyn Reed. While Evelyn began her work, Eleanor started her own, more subtle investigation. She thought about Clara. Her sister had always been flighty and a bit of a grifter, but she wasn't sophisticated. The idea of her being a mastermind in a corporate conspiracy seemed absurd. She was more likely a pawn, a tool. But what was she being used for? Eleanor began to piece together a timeline. Clara had lost her marketing job about 8 months ago. She'd been distraught, claiming she was laid off due to downsizing. Around that same time, she'd started spending more time with Liam, ostensibly for career advice. It was shortly after that the lavish gifts and the new apartment had materialized. On a hunch, Eleanor accessed the online backups of their home security system. She scrolled back through months of footage, looking at the logs of who came and went from their Greenwich home. She found what she was looking for on several weekday afternoons, when she had been in the city for a charity luncheon or an art gallery. Opening Clara's car was shown entering their gated driveway and leaving a few hours later. They hadn't just been using hotels. They had been using her home, her bed. The pain of this discovery was sharp and sickening, but it was overshadowed by a cold intellectual curiosity. They were sloppy. They were arrogant. They believed she would never look. Then a week later, Evelyn Reed called. Her voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of something grave. "Mrs. Vance, I've completed my initial review of the financials. I think you need to see this. Can you come to my office?" Evelyn's office was a sterile, no-nonsense space in a downtown skyscraper. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She simply spread a series of spreadsheets and highlighted documents across her conference table. "Vance Innovations is in serious trouble," Evelyn stated bluntly. "On paper, their revenues have been climbing steadily. But it's a house of cards." She pointed to a section detailing accounts receivable. "Their biggest client for the past year has been a company called Apex Data Solutions. According to these statements, Apex accounts for nearly 40% of Vance's total revenue. The problem is, as far as I can tell, Apex Data Solutions doesn't exist." Eleanor stared at her, uncomprehending. "What do you mean it doesn't exist?" "I mean it's a shell corporation," Evelyn explained. "It was registered in Delaware 8 months ago. It has no website, no employees, no physical address beyond a P.O. box. The payments from Apex to Vance are cyclical. Money goes from Vance to a series of other shell companies for consulting fees, and then gets funneled back through Apex as revenue. Liam isn't just fudging the numbers, Mrs. Vance. He's committing massive fraud. He's inflating his company's value to keep the loans coming and to attract a buyer. Evelyn slid another document across the table. It was the incorporation paperwork for Apex Data Solutions. The listed director and sole signatory was a name Eleanor had never heard. But then Evelyn produced another file, a copy of a wire transfer from a Vance Innovation subsidiary account to a personal savings account. The transfer was for $50,000, and the memo line read, "Initial consulting fee." The name on the receiving bank account was Clara Rhodes. The room tilted. The puzzle pieces didn't just click into place. They slammed together with the force of a tectonic shift. 8 months ago, Eleanor whispered, her mind racing back. The same time Clara lost her job. The same time the affair seemed to have started. He didn't pay her off to be his mistress. Evelyn said, her voice softening slightly as she saw the color drain from Eleanor's face. He hired her. He brought her into the fraud. Clara hadn't been a distraught, vulnerable young woman seeking comfort. She had been a co-conspirator. The affair wasn't the cause of the deception. It was the glue that held it together. Liam needed someone he could trust, someone whose loyalty he could buy to be the front for his fake company. Who better than his adoring, financially dependent sister-in-law? The apartment, the jewelry, the cash. It wasn't a lover's gift. It was payment for services rendered. It was hush money. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the cold leather pressing against her spine. The betrayal had mutated into something far more grotesque and terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Her husband wasn't just an adulterer. He was a criminal. And her sister wasn't just a home wrecker. She was an accomplice. And she, Eleanor Vance, was the personal guarantor on a $50 million loan to a fraudulent company. If Vance Innovations collapsed, the bank wouldn't just go after Liam. They would come for her. They would take everything. The house she designed, her savings, her future. Liam and Clara hadn't just broken her heart. They had meticulously engineered her complete and utter ruin. The drive back from Evelyn Reed's office was a masterclass in controlled panic. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon and white, a dizzying spectacle that mirrored the chaos in Eleanor's mind. She was tied to a sinking ship, a ship her husband and sister had deliberately scuttled while she was sleeping in her cabin. The prenup that was meant to protect Liam's assets now seemed like a cruel joke. Her liability on that loan guarantee superseded it entirely. They had exposed her to all of the risk while walling her off from all of the control. When she got back to the house, she didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the cavernous living room, the moonlight painting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The house, once a symbol of her success and partnership, now felt like a gilded cage, and the walls were closing in. For a few hours, despair was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. They had outmaneuvered her at every turn. They had used her love and trust as weapons against her. She could expose them, of course. She could go to the authorities, to the bank, and watch the whole house of cards come crashing down. Liam would likely go to prison. Clara would be implicated. But the fallout would be immense. The ensuing bankruptcy and lawsuits would entangle her for years, bleeding her dry financially and emotionally. They would drag her name through the mud, painting her as a scorned wife, seeking revenge, or worse, an ignorant spouse who was blissfully unaware of the rot in her own home. She would win a moral victory, perhaps, but be left with nothing but ashes. No. That was their game, a game of scorched earth. She needed to play a different one. Eleanor was not a CEO or a corporate raider. She was an architect. An architect understands structure. She understands leverage, tension, and controlled demolition. You don't just take a sledgehammer to a compromised building. You find the key stress points, you weaken them precisely, and you control the collapse. Her first move was to re-establish contact, but on her own terms. She had been ignoring their calls and texts for weeks. Now she picked up her phone and composed a message to Liam. "Liam, I need to speak with you. I am willing to discuss a path forward. Meet me at the house tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone." It was the bait. The phrase, "a path forward," was deliberately ambiguous, a glimmer of hope she knew he would cling to. For a man on the edge of a precipice, the offer of a stable ledge is irresistible. His reply was almost instantaneous. "Of course. Anything, Ellie. I'll be there. Thank you." The desperation was palpable. Her next message was to Clara. It was colder, more direct. "I know about Apex Data Solutions. I know you are the signatory. Be at the house tomorrow at 7:15 p.m. Do not speak to Liam about this beforehand. If you do, I will forward my evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office." This was not bait. It was a checkmate. It was a direct assertion of power that would terrify Clara, isolating her from her co-conspirator and ensuring she walked into the meeting off balance and afraid. The precise timing, 15 minutes after Liam was due to arrive, was also deliberate. She wanted a few minutes alone with her husband first. The next day, she prepared. She met with Evelyn Reed again, who helped her draft a series of legal documents. One was a post-nuptial agreement that effectively nullified the original prenup. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, all assets, including Liam's shares in Vance Innovations and all personal property, would be transferred to Eleanor. It also included a clause that made Liam solely responsible for all corporate debts, legally indemnifying her from the loan she had guaranteed. It was an outrageous one-sided document that no sane man would ever sign. The second document was an affidavit written for Clara's signature. It was a full confession of her role in the Apex Data Solutions fraud, detailing Liam's instructions, the dates of the wire transfers, and her willing participation. These were her weapons. At 6:55 p.m., she stood in the center of their living room. She had dressed carefully, not in a power suit, but in simple black trousers and a cashmere sweater. She looked calm, composed, in control of her environment. The documents were in a leather folio on the coffee table. Liam arrived exactly at 7, his face a mixture of hope and haggard anxiety. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, which now seemed like a funeral arrangement. "Ellie," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Put the flowers down, Liam," she said, her voice even and calm. It cut through his prepared speech like a shard of glass. He faltered, placing the bouquet awkwardly on a side table. "I'm not here to talk about us," she continued, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "I'm not here to discuss your feelings or your mistake. We are here to discuss the terms of my silence." His face clouded with confusion. "Your silence? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Apex Data Solutions," she said, letting the name hang in the air between them. The color drained from his face. It was a visceral, devastating reaction. In that single moment, he knew he was no longer dealing with his heartbroken wife. He was dealing with an adversary who knew his deepest, most dangerous secret. "How?" he stammered. "The how is irrelevant," Eleanor said, pushing the post-nuptial agreement across the table. "This is a new post-nuptial agreement. It transfers all of our assets, including your company shares, to me. It makes you solely liable for the $50 million loan I was foolish enough to guarantee. You will sign it. In exchange, I will not go to the authorities with what I know about your fraudulent revenue streams." He stared at the document, then at her, his expression a cocktail of disbelief and horror. "You can't be serious. This is everything. This would ruin me." "You ruined us, Liam," she replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but losing none of its steel. "You built this entire empire on a foundation of lies, and you made me the cornerstone without my knowledge. Now the building is about to collapse, and you have two choices. You can hand me the deed and walk away, or you can be crushed in the rubble. It's that simple." He was about to argue, to plead, to lash out, when the doorbell rang. Punctually. 7:15 p.m. Liam looked towards the door in confusion. "Are you expecting someone?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving his. "Your business partner?" She opened the door to find a pale, trembling Clara. When Clara saw Liam sitting in the living room, her eyes widened in terror. She realized immediately that she had walked into a trap. "Clara, come in," Eleanor said, with chilling politeness. "Liam and I were just discussing your joint venture." Clara shuffled into the room, unable to look at either of them. Eleanor turned back to her husband. "You see, Liam, you miscalculated. You thought Clara's loyalty could be bought with a new apartment and some jewelry. But my leverage is better. I have her signature on the incorporation documents for your shell company. I have bank records of your payments to her. I have a direct path to a federal indictment with her name on it." She then turned her icy gaze to her sister. "And for you, Clara, I have this." She slid the second document, the affidavit, across the table. "This is your confession. You will sign it, attesting that you acted on Liam's direct orders. Or the alternative is that you both go down together. I wonder who the prosecutors will be more lenient, with the millionaire mastermind or his naive, easily manipulated accomplice." She had them. She had pitted them against each other, exploiting their individual weaknesses. Liam's fear of prison and total ruin, and Clara's desperate instinct for self-preservation. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. Liam stared at Eleanor, and for the first time the charming, confident CEO was gone. In his place was a defeated man looking at a woman he had underestimated to his own destruction. He finally saw her not as his wife, but as the architect she was always meant to be. And she had just designed his cage. The living room, once a stage for their perfect life, had become a crucible. Liam, Clara, and Eleanor stood in a triangle of betrayal, the air thick with fear. "Ellie, think about what you're doing." Liam pleaded, his voice hoarse. "This isn't you. We can fix this. We don't have to destroy everything. You destroyed everything." Liam Eleanor's voice was cold steel. "You built this empire on a foundation of lies and made me the cornerstone without my knowledge. This isn't destruction. It's a controlled demolition. The only question is who walks away from the blast zone." She turned her icy gaze to her sister, who was visibly shaking. "Clara, I have an affidavit here detailing your role in the Apex fraud. You can sign it, agreeing to testify against Liam, or you can be charged as his co-conspirator. I wonder who the prosecutors will be more lenient with." Clara looked at Liam, searching for an escape route, but saw only his own terror. He couldn't save her. With a choked sob, she stumbled to the table, her survival instinct overriding any lingering loyalty. "He told me it was just paperwork," she whimpered. "Save it for the grand jury," Eleanor said, pushing a pen towards her. Clara's trembling hand scrawled her name, the signature severing the last thread of her and Liam's criminal alliance. Eleanor took the confession and turned back to her husband. "Your turn, Liam." She slid the post-nuptial agreement in front of him. It was a document of total surrender, transferring all marital assets, the house, the money, and Vance Innovations itself, to her. "You will sign this, and in return you will avoid prison. Clara will walk away. You will lose your empire, but you will keep your freedom. That is the only deal on the table." It was a brilliant, cruel stroke, forcing him to sacrifice everything to save the very woman he had corrupted. He sank into a chair, the fight gone. The master of the universe had been checkmated by the woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with a universe of regret and a strange, grudging respect. "You always were the brilliant one, Ellie," he whispered. He signed the document. With each stroke of the pen, he unmade his life, transferring a decade of work and wealth over to her. When he was done, he stood a hollowed-out man. He couldn't look at Clara as she scurried from the house. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I did love you." "Love is not a defense, Liam," she replied, not turning to face him. "It's a responsibility, and you abdicated it." He walked out into the night, leaving her alone in the house that was now solely hers, holding the documents that gave her everything she had never wanted. She had won, but the victory felt as hollow and cavernous as the room around her. In the months that followed, Eleanor became the architect of her own resurrection. The legal transfer of Liam's empire was swift. Liam and Clara vanished, accepting their exiles of ruin and shame. Eleanor, now the sole owner of a fraudulent company, teetering on collapse, went to work. She didn't hide the fraud. She leveraged it. With her forensic accountant, Evelyn Reed, she approached the bank that held the $50 million loan. She laid out the full extent of Liam's deception and then presented her plan. "The company's foundation is a lie," she told the board, "but the technology it was built on is real and valuable. Restructure the loan with me, and I will rebuild this company on a foundation of truth. Or you can force us into bankruptcy and recover pennies on the dollar." The bankers, valuing a salvageable asset over a total loss, agreed. Eleanor purged the company of the Orot, promoting the brilliant young engineers Liam had overlooked. She applied her architect's mind to the business, redesigning its structure with transparency and integrity at its core. To fund the recovery, she liquidated her old life. The Greenwich House, a beautiful structure full of ghosts, was the first to go, followed by the cars, the jet, and every other monument to Liam's ego. She moved into a modest apartment in the city, a space she designed for herself with clean lines and abundant light. In the corner, she placed a drafting table, a connection to the woman she was before she became Mrs. Vance. At night, after long days spent saving her new company, she would sit and draw sketching blueprints for a future she was finally building for herself. A year later, a letter arrived from Southeast Asia. It was Liam. He wrote that he had followed the news of Vance Innovations and saw how she had made it stronger and more honest than it ever was under his leadership. "You built something real from my lies," he wrote. "I hope you find happiness." She folded the letter, a final chapter closed. Her happiness was no longer a vague hope tied to someone else. It was in her work, in her quiet apartment, in the confident stroke of her pen across a fresh sheet of paper. Staring out at the city skyline, Eleanor Vance saw not a concrete jungle, but a landscape of infinite possibility. She had lost a marriage, but had found her purpose. She was no longer just a wife. She was the architect, holding the master plans to a life of her own design. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from the people closest to us. It teaches us that strength isn't about avoiding the fall. It's about how you choose to rebuild after the demolition. She lost a husband and a sister, but she found herself reclaiming a power she never knew she had. What would you have done in her position? Would you have chosen revenge or resurrection? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These real-life stories are full of lessons about resilience, trust, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. If Eleanor's journey resonated with you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that explore the hidden dramas of everyday life. Thank you for listening.